We've spent decades being told that a good head teacher is the one who's first in and last out. But what if that version of professionalism is actually just a high functioning stress response that's breaking our schools? Today, we're looking at the data and the biology that says it's time to stop being that superhero head. Welcome back to Being the Head. I'm Jacqui. Over the last few episodes, we've looked at how the leadership, Jill Berry on identity. Over the last few episodes, we've looked at the how of leadership, Jill Berry on identity and Adam Kolbeck on coaching culture. But today, we're looking at the engine room. Hello, everyone. I'm Jane, and we're really pleased to be joined by Gemma Atkins. Gemma's got a foot in both worlds. She's been an assistant head in the UK, leading on the quality of education and staff CPD. So she knows the reality of a wet Tuesday in Redcar. But she's also an NLP master practitioner. But she's also an NLP master practitioner and an affiliate member of Fabricia, coaching leaders globally on how to lead without losing their minds. Welcome, Gemma. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's lovely to be here. It's lovely to meet you both.
So before we move into sort of the leadership conversation, Gemma, we're going to actually sort of base this in the data and what we're actually looking like. I mean, the latest Teacher Tap data shows us that 43% of senior leaders are reporting being constantly or often stressed. And the Education Support Health Survey highlights that school leaders have significantly lower wellbeing scores than the general population. And it's not the fact we're just tired, we're actually operating in a state of chronic nervous system arousal. That's the trap. When you're in that red zone, your prefrontal cortex, the bit that you need for those nuanced parental conversations or strategic budget planning, effectively goes offline. We're leading from our survival brain and calling it professionalism. Gemma, let's get into this really meaty conversation. When you worked in SLT, why is it that we still feel like we're protecting our own energy is a bit fluffy rather than a professional standard? Why have we got that still?
Well, I think just to back up what you just said with the data, really, I think the old model of leadership is broken. And I think that's the model of leadership that we've all been conditioned to lead with and lead by, and what good leadership that looks like. And when you go back to the DFE wellbeing data that was published last July, actually that was pretty shocking. You got 69% of teachers, sorry, more than that, 89% of teachers and leaders who are experiencing stress. 62% are experiencing mental health issues. 49% are experiencing physical health issues. And I was a victim of that in that sense, because I developed really bad migraines. And then we look at why people are leaving the profession. What's increased workload and also well-being. They're the two most commonly cited themes as to why people are leaving our profession. And I think when you look at the global recruitment and retention stats, after 5 years, a third of qualified teachers have left the profession already. And again, there's loads more that I could quote, but obviously I'm just very conscious of time. But I think one of the bits of data that I've just come across now, that in 2030, which is 4 years time, we're going to have a recruitment gap of 44 million primary and secondary teachers globally. And, it's scary. It's a scary place to be in. However, having spoken to an ITT provider that I'm actually doing I found it really affirming that actually this year, more than any other year recently, we've got more teachers signing up again to qualify as teachers. So, there's real hope, but we have to do something different. We have to be leading differently. And that's the real key there. So coming back to the question that you've just asked, I think it's around, and I've spoken to a lot of people about this, it's around the culture. It's around the culture and the societal norms that we're conditioned to lead with, and it's that kind of notion of vulnerability. Vulnerability is being a weakness. And actually, if we can't be vulnerable, then there's that, or if we are vulnerable, you can't cope, you can't do that job properly. And I think as well, we get these jobs, so we're able to prove that we can make impact. We can get people on a bus, we can drive them to a destination, we can get off, we can, you know, have that amazing impact, and we can demonstrate that. And we get these fantastic roles in leadership. But then there's an accountability and a pressure that nobody prepares you for. And that obviously gets incrementally harder as you get higher and higher, of course. So there's no one's preparing us for what that looks like and how we deal with that pressure, that stress, that anxiety, that worry, that 3 a.m. wake up. Like, what does that look like? And that fundamentally needs to come back to the thing that every leader needs to have, which is that self leadership. What is it to be that leader, and how do we cope with that? How do we manage it? And we can do that. And that's very much what I do in my programs. And I think, to continue answering your question, I think, the buck stops with us. Whether you're a middle leader as a head of department or SLT in charge of positive education or head teacher, whatever that role is, the buck does stop with us. There's that accountability and pressure that I've just talked about. And everyone relies on you. And so it's almost like we're having to play the armor up. We play a performative role, which most people nod and smile to because they're like, yeah, we do a performative role. We're not necessarily our authentic self in that moment. But actually, if we are playing this performative role, it's exhausting. And also, what we end up doing is we end up pouring from an empty cup. So we have to ask ourselves, well, how are we showing up? How are we showing up for the kids? How are we showing up for the staff that are in our care? And actually, one of the most important things that we can do is to actually fill our own cup so that we can continue to fill the cups of the communities that we serve every day and really show up, in the best possible way, the best version of ourselves, every day. And so I think it's a non-negotiable, in my opinion.
It's really tough to do, though, isn't it? In reality, it's a really tough call because we spoke to Jill Berry and she talked about the superhero mask, she said. And many heads feel that if they show that crack, the whole school might panic because I'm the leader and the buck stops with me. And I remember feeling that as a head, if I crack, then the whole system will fall apart. But actually it won't. And hopefully you've created a culture where it doesn't happen. But you use NLP to look at leadership identity, I've read. And how does a leader then drop that mask without losing their authority or their staff trust? Because I think that's a real problem for leaders.
It is. And I think what I do is I integrate somatic trauma informed leadership as well as the NLP, as well as the ICF coaching. So it's a real blend of all three, actually. And I was actually having this conversation last night with a head teacher that I coach in Dubai. And we had this exact conversation about how do you do it? Like, how can you show up authentically, but still have almost that authority? And, for me, and we're very aligned with this, our values really aligned that we are human first, leader second. And I think we forget that. And I think we really forget that we're human first and we're leader second. And we've got to lead with our values. I think that's really important that we lead. So every decision, our behavior, our attitude, whatever that is underpinned by our personal values and our professional values as well. And I think, when you get to know people, I think the most important thing to be doing is getting to know the people that are in your team, in your school, whatever that looks like. Because what you end up with, and there's lots of kind of nuances to what I'm going to say here, but actually, what we're developing is trust. And trust and relationships is the foundation of any organization, whether you're in a school or in a corporate organization. That is fundamentally the most important thing. And the way that we deal with one person, might be very different to the way that we deal with another person because we know them, we know perhaps their triggers, we know perhaps when we start to have this dialogue what might be in their invisible trauma backpack, what might trigger them, and we can deal with that in an emotionally intelligent way. One of the things that when you asked that question kind of came up for me was about Brene Brown's marble jar. I don't know whether you guys have ever heard of Brene's
Oh,
marble.
yeah.
Oh yeah, we love that, don't we? And
We
for
do,
people,
yeah.
yeah, and for people that might not know it, and I won't tell the whole story because I'm conscious of time, but it's very much about, the people that are in your team. It's knowing, it's noticing. I know that your mum's not been very well recently. How is she? How's your son, going through year 7 transition, for example? Just noticing, knowing them, being human first, connecting with them in that way. And every time you do that, every time you are interested in them, develop rapport and relationships, what ends up happening is we end up putting a marble in our trust jar. And what ends up happening, which inevitably there are points where we have to react to something. We have to get round the table and go, right, what are we going to do? So instead of standing there going, right, trust me, like this is what we're going to do, you just got to trust me. Actually, what you've got then is a group of people who are going to roll their sleeves up and they're going to go, What do you need me to do? And that fundamentally comes from that relational intelligence, and it's so important. And I think that's one of the lessons that I learned very on in my leadership career. I thought I had to play a performative role. There were certain things I had to act in a certain way, do certain things, and it wasn't true to who I was. It wasn't true to my authentic self. It wasn't true to my intuition and my values. And I was a very young. I think I was 26 when I got my first, head of department role, and I had to learn that. And it took me a long time to realize that actually, no, you're good enough and your authentic self and your intuition is absolutely right in this moment. And it is okay to be human first. And that's how you call people in. That's when they're going to pull their sleeves up and get in the, in the dirt with us when we need them to. So yeah. And I think when we're armored up and playing those performative roles, it's exhausting. It really is exhausting. And those are some of the things where we end up operating from dysregulation. And it's the dysregulation that causes the burnout. And it's not having that self awareness or that self leadership. I think perhaps we're self aware, but we don't know the tools to self lead in that moment where we can then recognize that we're dysregulated. Our prefrontal cortex, we've flipped our lid, and now we've got to really ground and come back into what we call our safe window of tolerance there. And I think, we have to model that for the rest of our, our staff. And I think, we don't want pupils to armor up. We want pupils to be authentic. We want to give them agency. We want them to be fantastic, resilient learners, better learners, metacognition, all the things that we do to give our students agencies. But yet we don't do that for ourselves. That we need to give ourselves that kind of leadership agency, if you like, and the tools and techniques to navigate those inevitable bumps in the road. Some will be big, some will be small, but you can absolutely do that. And I think that's what leadership is missing at the moment. Those invaluable tools and techniques and that self leadership so that we can lead ourselves before we're leading other people, and leading those people then more effectively, but also navigating those inevitable bumps in the road that we all have personally and professionally.
Why is it missing then, Gemma? Because I think back to, I mean, Jane and I did MPQH. Oh, it's on the wall. My lordy, 26 years ago. We had really good training. I mean, a lot of it was about networking, but we did do a lot of that. And when I subsequently became a trainer on MPQH, I was absolutely shocked that they'd removed that element, that human kind of element of how you lead. So why is it happening, Gemma? Why do you think we're not getting that, and we're getting more and more burnout, and we're getting people leaving or not going into to educational leadership? Why is that happening?
Well, I don't think I think research is come on so much, and our knowledge now of how the human brain works. And our honestly, 2.5 years ago, I thought my nervous system was there to allow my muscles to contract to allow me to move. Like that was, I was like, nervous system. Like, what does that mean? I had no idea really about fight or flight or freeze. I had no idea about the windows of tolerance. I had no idea about how we can ground in those moments, what we can do. I had no idea as well that we all of us carry in our backpack an invisible trauma backpack. And I think the research has moved on so much now that actually we can become more relational, and we've got the science to back up the fact that we can be human first. And I think people have been feeling this for years and years, but now we've got the science to back it up with no, this is the right way to be doing it. We can be human first. We can show up as our authentic self. And this is why, and these are the new cultures that we can now create.
I mean, I think the bigger challenge there is what happens if you've got leaders above you
Mm.
who aren't very aware.
I
So
think
I think that is a real challenge. I think if you as a leader yourself can model it, but your leaders, you find that blocker, I
mm,
think that can be very difficult, can't it?
I think you're right, but I also think as well when we've got that ability to self-lead and we know ourselves and we become a ninja with our self-awareness and we've got all of these wonderful tools and techniques at our fingertips, what we're able to do is kind of detach from that and kind of go, okay, like very often, if for example your line manager says something in a certain way, call you for a meeting and their tone was a bit direct or curt, or perhaps they've not said something in a trauma-informed or emotionally intelligent way, actually you're able to at that point kind of go, that's their stuff actually, not my stuff. And a lot of my coaching is very much around doing that. That's their stuff. There's obviously in that moment, and it kind of creates empathy for that person. And I've again, I won't go into details, but I've really done that myself for people that have line managed me, created real empathy. So that person is showing up in this way for a reason, and it's not me, but it's something else that they're carrying at that moment in time that's causing them, and probably a pattern that's generated probably from an unprocessed trauma, whatever that is, even childhood traumas, show up in our adult world. And if they've been triggered, they're operating from fight, flight, or freeze. And then therefore that's affecting how they show up for me as my line manager. So it gives you that kind of empathy, compassion, understanding, and that real ability to kind of go, no, that's it's not me. Like I don't have to flip my lid at this moment. I don't need to start worrying that there's danger around, oh, that I'm not doing my job properly, that I'm going to get sacked or whatever that looks. You can give you real it allows you just detach and allows your perception of the whole situation to change, which is invaluable, I think, because of that self leadership and that preservation and being able to stay really centered, grounded in that. And I'm not saying that you won't ever go. Not saying you won't ever get triggered. Of course you will, but it's that ability to recognize, and it's that space in that moment when you recognize that there's something coming up for you. You've got a space to make a different choice, and that's what we all have. You can either go down, the fight and flight. We can get panicked. We get anxiety. I mean, you know that how it lands in your body, but then it translates to the people that you line manage. Then that rush, the pressure, the urgency, the overwhelm, and actually you can choose a different way in that moment. It's that self awareness, in my opinion. Yeah,
I think
brilliant.
picking up
Thank
on
you.
that, Gemma, we've had conversations with Emma Hunter, which talked about the brain hug, what you've picked up on.
Mm.
And, adults need to be able to self-regulate themselves in order for them to be able to co-regulate with the adult, with the other adults and children in their care. And we've also spoken to Adam Colbeck around the culture of schools and made a really great case for teacher agency around culture. But you and I both know when the Ofsted window opens, that agency goes right out the window and the compliance takes over. People go into that fight, fright, or freeze sort of zone. How can a leader use that relational intelligence to stop that panic? Because normal every day they're stopping, they're assessing, they're reflecting on that. But in that moment when that panic sets in, what can they do to stop that trickling down to the ECTs, to the middle leaders when the pressure's on?
I think this is when the NLP work that I've done it comes into play here, and it's about reframing because we've got to stop playing the Ofsted game. If we are in our schools doing the best for our children every day, we show up. Yeah, there are things that we're doing brilliantly. Yeah, there are things that we've got to get better at. Of course, there always will be. That's never going to go away. But we've got to stop playing into this Ofsted, this Ofsted, kind of panic almost. We've got to reframe it. And if we are doing the best for our children in our care every day, we work hard, they're nurtured pastorally, they're challenged academically, we've got the systems and processes, assessment monitoring, all of those things that feed into this. We're doing the best that we can every day, then we should be Ofsted ready every day. Because we should then at that point open the doors, brilliant, come in. Let's just celebrate what we're doing with our children every day. And it's reframing that. We should be Ofsted ready every day. And I think that Ofsted window, as soon as you say that, there's panic that sets in. We become dysregulated. And I know from being in it myself, we're in the Ofsted window. And then it's like, okay, well, I'm not really going to sleep very well for the first 3 days of the week because I need to get through to Wednesday. And if I haven't had the call, then that's fine. I can sleep then for Thursday, Friday. And it's getting out. I think it's Monday now, isn't it? I think with the
It's
new,
Monday, yeah.
with
I've
the new.
lived that and it's horrendous. I lived that for 2 years and I
Mm.
think that was the icing on the cake that sort of broke me. It was horrendous.
And just that worry, that constant anxiety, but it's that reframing. It's like knowing that what you're doing for the children in your care any one moment is your absolute best. And, you've got everything to underpin it and you just welcome them in, celebrate what's going on. And there are things that you're exceptional at, the things that need to be improved, and that's okay. And I think it comes back to, and I will always talk about this nervous system awareness, because fundamentally you're operating from a place of dysregulation. And what ends up happening is that if you're rushed, if you're overwhelmed, if you're stressed, that will show up. Your nervous system sets the tone. Your nervous system sets the tone. And I think, if you're rushed, then your team are going to feel pressured. If you're overwhelmed, they may well hold back or become defensive or avoid. If you're coming from an anxious place and they can tell that, they're going to become quite cautious and maybe a bit defensive. So I think this is when this self leadership becomes so paramount. Yeah, of course. And I'm not saying that's going to go, of course, So coming in, of course, getting that call, that's going to cause us to dysregulate. Of course it is, because you want to show your school in the best light and your staff, and you do hold that accountability, that pressure. Of course you do. But actually, when we become really secure with who we are and what we stand for and what values we operate with, and we've got that ability in that moment to become a ninja with your self awareness. I talk about this all the time with my on my programs and in my one to one. We've got to become a ninja with our self awareness, and you've got to catch yourself. Okay, how am I showing up now? How am I going to show up for these staff in this staff room? How am I going to show up in this meeting? And there is a point where you have to make a choice instead of operating with that overwhelm and that anxiety, which we can do because we are dysregulated, because we're worried, we're panicking, but actually making a different choice in that moment. I've even last week I was coaching a head teacher and she was going through a particular inspection, and it wasn't an Ofsted, but it was an internal inspection within a trust. And she had to, and I love the fact that she chose to. She didn't agree with some feedback that was coming back to her. And she felt, and she was just like, I dysregulated entirely in that moment. So what she did is she thought, I'm going to say something that I possibly regret here in an unprofessional manner, which I don't want to do. Because she was going to contest it, but maybe not in that moment because she was dysregulated. So she just said, I'm just going to pop to the toilet for a second. She took her shoes and socks off. She put her feet on the ground. She said to herself out loud, I am safe. I am safe. I am safe. And she went back to her breath and, coming back to the breath and just grounding takes, whatever works for you. There are so many somatic practices that you can do just to bring your prefrontal cortex back online so that they're all working, your limbic system, your brainstem, your prefrontal cortex are all working together collaboratively,
Right.
to make good decisions moving forward. So she did that. She chose not to actually. When she went back in, she thought, no, I'm not going to contest that now. I'm going to listen. And I'm going to, then make the case when she was more grounded and more regulated moving forward. But these are wonderful things that you can have up your sleeve. I'm not saying that everyone needs to obviously go to the toilet and take their shoes and socks off, but that's what works for her,
Yeah.
and that's okay. But there's different things that work for different people. And that's the important bit, yeah.
Gemma, I find this fascinating because when I was leading, when I first started leading, we didn't get any training on any of this at all. I mean, we are going back a while, but it was just sort of inert. And I remember having a conversation with our director of education, and I said, "Can we actually teach people to be leaders?" And I
Mhm.
guess what you're saying is, yes, you can teach people to be leaders. It doesn't have to become natural. There are natural leaders, aren't there? And you can see them from an early age. But actually, you can choose to give them those tools in those toolbox. Because what I'm worried about is what we portray as leaders. And you've alluded to this in what you're saying. Actually, that has a massive impact on your team. If you go into a meeting deregulated and
Mm.
stressed and, well, let's get through this, let's give them some dates and let's get out the meeting, then that is going to have what they see of leadership. And actually, there's some wonderful joys and some wonderful moments I've had in my leadership as I've gone through. And we want to portray this. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there's so many pressures that we have in our education system that are coming from, if we haven't got that almost rhino skin and we portray that, how do we stop ourselves achieving all those things without actually burning out those key people that are
Mm.
actually holding it together? Because there's that balance between, I don't want to have everything. I want to be able to delegate, but also I want to make sure that it's led in the way that I want to. What do you do to support leaders with that kind of
Mm.
thought process?
I think it's always about, and yeah, it's always about for me coming back to the higher intention. I think we forget that. I think we get so bogged down, don't we, with stuff, the plates that we spin, the admin, school development plans, all of the stuff, that everything that we've got. And there are so many plates to spin, but it's coming back to what is the higher intention? Like, what is the purpose of what we're doing for? And that's something that we do in NLP as well. What is the higher intention of this? And interestingly, behaviors of leaders and children, they always have, there's always a higher intention of their behavior, and it's always a positive one, actually. But what's the higher intention of why we're here? And I think it's about remaining focused on what's important, and I think we lose that sometimes with the amount. It's kind of, we can't see the wood for the trees, coming back to that kind of phrase. But it's also, and I can't remember who said it. It was there's an Olympic coach. I wish I could remember who it was now. But yeah, he talked about everything they did. So it was the rowing team coming towards a particular Olympics. And they talked about everything they did in the lead up to those Olympics was all about, is every decision that they made was going to be about, is this going to make the boat move faster? And that was everything. So whether that was going out for a meal, whether that was about including a particular type of training, whatever that was, every decision was, is this going to push the boat? Is this going to make the boat go faster? And I think the same thing can be applied in education. Is this going to get our children to where they need to be? Is this going to give them the social mobility? Is this going to make them feel whatever it is it going to move our boat forward? And I think sometimes we get so sidetracked by the noise, and there is so much noise in education. It's coming through that and just remembering what that higher intention is, the purpose is, whatever that might be in that moment.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, for me, that was, when I used to get really deregulated, which didn't happen very often because I just didn't, but it would be when somebody chipped at that moral purpose,
Mm.
when somebody went for that or knew that was what would really push me, when I knew that decisions were being made that were out of my hands, which were against my vision for what good education was for the schools that I built up. So I totally understand that. I think there's going to be a lot of people who would relate to that as well. Get that very clear in your mind and stick to your guns. And
Mm.
actually, I've made decisions to leave institutions settings when that has been and had to be, I mean, a bit more of a risk taker than Jane, but I've had to make those decisions, and they're not going to be financially great decisions, to be honest. But actually, that's what's driven me, is my moral purpose and where I should be and what I believe in.
Mm.
And I think you've got to be very strong to do that, haven't you? You've got to be in a very strong position to do that.
I completely agree. And I think one thing that I've learned throughout my years of being in education is that, you've got to have your values have got to be aligned totally.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because what you have are organizations that say, well, these are our values. This is how we operate. This is how we make decisions and our behavior, our attitude, whatever it is that we're doing. But actually, that's kind of rubbish because we all
Mm.
operate with our own value system. So what you need to
Mm.
do is to pull people in that share the same values, and that's the bit. And that's why, and again, I coach a lot of people. But recently we were looking at somebody who's looking at moving schools. Rather than coming from a place of kind of panic and fear, I've got to get a job somewhere. Who will take me? Am I going to be good enough? It's actually no. Hang on a second. This is who I am. This is my self worth. These are all the wonderful innate resources that I've got, but the impact that I've made over the course of however long. Actually, who's going to be lucky enough to have me? And do my values align with how they operate? And one of the things that we did actually is that I kind of invited him into saying, okay, well, when you're going through like the first interview stage, the look around, the chat, the informal chat before you kind of get shortlisting, all the rest of it, I said, went really deep. What are your values? We spent a lot of time unpicking what his professional values are, because values are different in family, profession, health and fitness, diet, whatever it is. They are different. There'll be crossover, of course. But actually, okay, so these are your 4, 5 core values that are really important that need to show up in order for you to align with yourself as who you are and the authentic leader that you are. My invite was to find evidence throughout that day as to how his values align, and actually go, okay, well, when they said that and when I saw this, that was feeding into the respect or the integrity or the honesty or whatever that was. And actually, just that invite is to look at, no, I'm a valuable asset, and I will give, we're in a profession, we give our all to these, it becomes, I mean, I know for me, it was meaning, my purpose, my identity, it was everything. If they got me, they got the whole of me. And I tell you what, I would, I'd have the back of anyone. I would work, 200% for that organization. But actually the values, I think, for me, are the thing that can actually stop that burnout, because then you're not fighting against an organization, which is frustrating. When decisions are being made that don't align with you, conversations are being had that don't align with you. And I think that's, again, I could talk more about that, but I think that's really important, just to make sure that those values are aligned.
And I totally agree. And sometimes in larger organizations, they have values, but the people at the top don't actually live out those values. And I think that's when that discord happens, and that discomfort and dysregulation as leaders come in, and that fear, and it's not a nice place to work when that's like, and it logically doesn't make sense when you're trying to work in a system like that, where you actually believe and live out those values that they've said are the key values for that particular establishment which do align with you, but actually in reality it doesn't, and that's really hard. I mean, that's a really good piece of piece of advice for people looking, but sometimes it's not always. It's probably scratching below the surface as well.
But you know which schools you want to work for, though, Jane, don't you? You know, you have
Yeah, well,
that idea and you think, oh no,
I'm
and
not
you go
talking
around and
about
you get
I'm
that
not talking
feel.
about schools, Jacqui. I'm talking about multi-academy trusts here.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
I'm
All
not
right then.
talking about standalone schools. Yeah, standalone schools, there are, you can see, and you hear about that. But when you've got, these not large, when you've got multi-academy trusts that say that they've got one set of values, and I'm not saying this is all of them, I'm just talking from my own experience, and actually they don't live out. People who have that sort of authority aren't actually living the values that they've put down. It makes it very difficult for leaders that are sitting under that layer to actually sort of feel safe to do that and to lead their schools in an authentic way, because it is such a mismatch.
I think, Gemma, you've hit that nail on the head, haven't you, about that being that purpose. When you've got a different purpose, and they would see that purpose was the values, but actually how you see your purpose in what you're doing may be completely different. They might have the same written slogan above it, but that perception of how they see their moral purpose to how you see it is where the clashes happen. Do you advocate then that it's really good to lay that out and have those discussions with your teams? How do
Totally.
you?
Yeah, totally. I've worked with a number of organisations, both corporate and obviously within education as well. And the first thing that we do, and there's lots of things that we do, but the first thing that we do is we align values. Because, yeah, there are two things, in my opinion, that unite us. That when you sit around that table, there are two things. Firstly, the higher intention as to why you're there. So for education, it's children's social mobility, of course, first and foremost. And secondly, it's the values that align us all and how we operate and how we make decisions. And, so we go deep into looking at what everyone's professional values are in that moment. And then we look at grouping them collectively. And actually, by the end of, the session that I run, we look at, okay, well, what is it that unites us here? If we can pull everyone's been seen, everyone's been heard, everyone's been validated. We're meeting those 9 core emotional needs that we all have as a human being. Everyone's fed into this. Okay, well, what are they? What are those 5 top values that unite us all? And actually, then you're operating from that, that kind of
Shared purpose.
but yeah, it's a exactly. It's a shared purpose, but it's also comes back to every time we've got to make a decision, every time we've got to have a conversation, every time we're leading assembly, a staff meeting, a pupil progress meeting, whatever that looks like. Like these are the things that underpin how we're going to show up in that moment. And I think it comes back to, again, I talk about self leadership all the time, but A, you've got the values, B, you've got the self leadership, because actually you want to be showing up in a way, particularly pupil progress meetings. I used to have a lot of heads of department that sit around the table and you're literally going through their data. And that can be so triggering for some people. So you have to do it in a way. Yeah, of course, there needs to be professional challenge, of course, but we can do it in a way that's not going to allow them to become dysregulated and go into either fight or flight or shut down. You know, or leave that room feeling really negative, bad, dysregulated. They're going to have a bad evening, might not sleep very well. There are ways of doing things where we can put in that professional challenge, but in an emotionally intelligent way that we're not triggering our members of staff.
Gemma, you talk about self leadership, and that's a theme that that we've talked about so far. And I know you've created a leadership program, the Science of Sustainable Leadership, and I know that self leadership is just one of those areas. What are the other areas of that program, and how do they all sort of interlink? So, Gemma, you've talked about self-leadership and the impact that has. And I know that you've developed a professional learning program called the Science of Sustainable Leadership. So where does self-leadership fit with that? And what are the other parts of that training that you're providing?
Yeah, so the first part is always about that self-leadership, how you're showing up, how, as I've said several times, your nervous system sets the tone. So actually that self-leadership piece is so important, and we go deep into that. We do a day of that. And then the second one is about leading together. So actually when you get so let's take, for example, I don't know, a team of 6 people. So you've got 6 senior leaders, 6 people sitting around the table. That means you've got 6 sets of emotional needs, 9 emotional needs. You've got 6 sets of emotional needs. You've got 6 nervous systems, and then you've got 6 maps of the world. And by map of the world, I mean all of their experience to date is allowing them to land or causing them to land in a particular way in that room. And that's very much the trauma informed work that I do. So that kind of, I talked about that invisible backpack, you know, and I don't know whether I said this before, but actually I think I did. About, it doesn't have to be a massive trauma. It could be, it could be not getting picked for a school team, for example. So we all have those 3 things: emotional needs, those 9 sets of emotional needs. We've got 6 sets of nervous systems and 6 maps of the world. Well, when you put that round the table, crikey,
That's
that is
massive when you say it like
massive.
that.
It's huge. Because and the one thing, whenever I talk to, and I've talked to, interviewed, coached like hundreds of leaders over the past 2.5 years, and the one thing that I always get is, you know what, Gemma, like I can say one thing to one person in one way, and I can say the same thing to a different person in the same way, and they react completely differently. And it's that. So what we do in that moment is it's looking at how do we do that? How do we pull these nervous systems, these emotional needs, these maps of the world into a table, around a table that's going to allow us to move forward effectively. We look at, there's some NLP work that I do within that. There's a lot of trauma informed work that comes into that. And also, again, one of my biggest training needs, or biggest training requests, should I say, is, okay, like, people avoid challenging conversations. How can I care deeply for my staff? Because I really care deeply for my staff, but how do I challenge them directly without the relationship breaking down? And that, again, that's all on that kind of day 2, how to lead together, how to challenge directly, but care deeply for the staff that are in your care. So we go into all of that, because it's difficult. And I think if we're not calling out, the behaviors that aren't working, because we don't want to upset the balance, we don't like confrontation, perhaps that's something in our trauma backpack, that confrontation feels icky, dysregulates you. It's something that actually you actively avoid. Then that becomes a behavior norm. The standards drop, the expectations drop. And so it's really important that we're able to have those conversations. But again, it's all about reframing them. It's a conversation for growth. It's not a challenge. I've got to go into a challenging conversation now. But again, part of that is how you show up in that meeting, how you prepare for that meeting, how are you going to invite that person into that meeting. Like, I work with a lady over in Singapore, and she gets an email from her head teacher, just drops in, meeting request, I don't know, 3:30 tomorrow. Bang! Like, we've done a lot of work, but the nervous system just dysregulates. What have I done? And it always comes back to it negative, constantly looking for threat all the time. Prefrontal cortex has gone offline. See you later. No decision making. We're not able to emotionally regulate. And so, yeah, like, where's the threat? What have I done wrong? What do you want to see me about? And so we've got to be really careful about, how we're inviting people into this meeting and how we're conducting them. How are we going to, and if we're recognizing that that member of staff is turning up dysregulated, and we look at all of this, how are they showing up? What are the signs and symptoms we've got to look for in that moment to see whether they are dysregulated or not? There are lots of things that we can be observing. And then how can we make them feel safe in that moment? Because that conversation, if they flip their lid and if their prefrontal cortex has gone offline, you're not going it's not going to go anywhere productive, well, or be particularly productive. They're either going to shut down, get defensive, and just walk out. And then you'll get the meeting after the meeting, which is, oh, you'll never guess what, she's pulled me into a meeting, she said this, and and you do. And whenever I say that, the meeting after the meeting, there is always a meeting after the meeting, because people aren't able to perhaps say what they want to, or they've shut down, they've frozen in that moment, because perhaps it's not been led in a particular way. So yeah, we go into all of that in Lead Together. And then the final one is about leading the future. And that's actually, as I've said before, we've got 9 emotional needs as human beings, and they need to be met on balance for us to be happy and to thrive. And part of doing that, and part of an emotional need is that we need to make sure that as staff, they're seen, heard, and validated. We all want that. We all want to be seen, heard, and validated. And for me, that's true well-being. If you're seen, heard, and validated, and you've got a voice, it might not be, decisions might not get made in your favour, of course not, but you've been heard. Then for me, that's true well-being, because that's a cultural shift now. So in day 3, we look at that shift. Okay, well, how do we establish that? And again, it's trauma informed, it's NLP informed, it's coaching informed, but how do we lead the future? How do we ensure that we can really make our staff be seen, heard, and validated. And we look at how to establish that culture. And it's very much through coaching. But I don't think you need to have a coaching qualification to be an awesome coach. I really don't. And I also think as well, yeah, there are some great models that we can use, and I know that you both use these. But I also think as well, we forget the human bit of it. We forget that this person is a human being. And actually, what we've got to do is have the confidence to be able to meet that person where they're at and to be able to professionally challenge them. Like I coached the head teacher this week from the UK this time. And I could tell why he was, he was avoiding eye contact. I could just tell by his demeanor or how he was coming across. I could tell he was in this functional freeze. And so with total love, it's my job to point that out to him and say, right, I would love to just, spend 3 minutes just getting you back to your safe zone here. And so that's what we did. And it was interesting because he was like, yeah, I've never done that before. He said, that was amazing. That's so relaxing. He said, I'm waking up at 3 a.m. at the moment. I've got like headaches that I've never had before because he's operating from that dysregulation. So we did a lot of work on that session because he just had no idea about what it was, how, what to do about it actually. So
There's
yeah, anyway,
something very simple about slowing down, isn't there? There's something very lovely about taking the time to slow down and recognizing that in yourself.
yeah,
It's very powerful, isn't it?
it is. And it's what you guys do as well. Like, gosh, we see the power of coaching. I mean, wow. I mean, it's incredible. Even last night, I was at my last coaching call yesterday. Head teacher turned up. He's like, "Oh, I don't really know. I don't really know what I want to talk about." And he was feeling quite like flat on a bit of a plateau. And by the end of it, that spark had really ignited in him. He had a really clear way forward. He was like, "Oh, I'm actually really excited for the future." And that was amazing to see. But you just need space. It's just space. It's someone to meet you where you're at. And it's someone just to ask those right questions at the right time to allow you to start thinking, with no glass ceilings, really.
That safe space for them to stop, breathe, reflect with no judgment, I think is so powerful. And the learning that comes from it for them and for us as coaches as well is just that those are your buzzy moments, I think.
Yeah, they're just amazing. And even like last week, I spoke to somebody and I was like, so just, some curiosity. I said, I'm just curious about why this is a 3-year plan. And it was really funny. He sat there and went, yeah, I don't know. He said, I just thought that's how I had to do it, but it's really funny. It's so, because we just laughed at that point. And so by the end of it, actually, we'd reduced it to an 18-month plan. It's like, I don't know, actually. I just think this is what people do. They talk about 3-year plans, don't they? But yeah, I just love that, and I just love the fact that we laughed at that, and we were like, yeah, okay, let's change that. It doesn't work.
I mean, the people who are listening cannot see Gemma's face when she starts talking about her coaching, and your face. I mean, people say this about Jane and I when we start talking about education and things like that. Your face lights up. You are such an effervescent character that I think no wonder you're a success in what you're doing, because I can see it in your face. As soon as you're talking about the people that you're coaching, you're definitely making a difference. We'd love to make sure that we could get this out to more people, because the power of coaching and the power of self-reflection is just incredible. I mean, Jane talks about me mentoring her, but actually it was a two-way thing. If I didn't have Jane going, oh, have you done your action plan? And look at, she had everything on the wall. It was beautiful. And I was absolutely hopeless at that. So, I mean, it was a two-way thing for us. We just found each other and we were in very similar circumstances. But a lot of people out there don't have that opportunity or don't understand it. It's the fear factor of it, isn't there, as well, that you're trying to get across. And I think, more that you can do on that and the more that you can show your wonderful sunny personality, it would be a better thing for the education profession. So thank you for all you do.
No, thank you very much. No, I love it. And it's just still really passionate about being in it, providing that support. But I know it's the support that I wish that I'd had.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's where we've come
Absolutely.
from. That's totally where we came from. Yeah.
And I think it's recognizing, in all the years that I was there, we haven't got this agency, and I am absolutely, it's my, I genuinely believe it's my calling to put this back into, to give this to people that most need it, those tools, those techniques, those frameworks, windows of tolerance, all the trauma informed, the NLP, the coaching, everything, pulling it all together, because this is going to make a real difference, and it makes the job sustainable and actually does something about those awful mental health statistics that we talked about at the beginning, the recruitment and retention, and that's what drives me every day. And yeah, I'm super passionate about it. So yeah, thank you for that. It's
Well,
really
I
nice.
know you don't like it, Gemma, but I think people should watch you on YouTube because
Oh,
they will
really? Yeah.
see it. As soon as you start talking it, your whole face lights up. And I think I
Oh,
would encourage people to tune in on YouTube as well. So thank
thank
you.
you. That's really kind.
Gemma, last question. So you've moved, you've got, as we said at the start, you've got your feet in two camps, really. You coach in education, but you also have some corporate global leaders that you coach as well. So you've seen the behind scenes of some incredibly high pressure roles. What's the one truth about leadership stress that you've seen in your private coaching, that thing that's so raw and so common that most heads are too terrified to admit out loud in a cluster meeting?
I don't think there's just one thing. I can name several things probably pretty quickly. I'm not good enough. And when you get underneath that, I'm not good enough, there's a real I'm not good enough wound that people carry. And when you dig and you give them space and you get them to really unpick why they're showing up as they're showing up and what their patterns are, that I'm not good enough, it does sit there. And I'm talking about exec heads as well as, all the way down. And there's also this, I also hear this phrase a lot. I'm going to get found out at any moment. No, I'm going to get found out at any moment. And that's a really big one. And I think we have such high expectations of ourselves. And I think, yeah, I'm absolutely guilty of that. But it's almost like an impossible standard to uphold in that sense. Second guess themselves. They don't know the way forward. I get, head teachers, I don't know what to do. Like literally, and I can't say that to anybody else, but I don't know what to do. Waking at 3 a.m., that's a real, I mean, I hear that over and over again. With it, they're always switched on. So they're physically present, but mentally elsewhere with their families at home when they get home in the evenings. And a lot of, the more work I do and the more I see and the more I coach, the more learning I do, people are operating with this functional freeze, a lot of the time because they become quite shut down, collapsing in, and they go really into survival mode. So yeah, I think those are the common things that I see. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. And a lot of those resonate with me. All of them resonate with me. I've felt and said those things many a time in the past and in the current present as well. So we're moving into the If I Only Knew segment of our episode. And we're going to start with you, Gemma. So if you could go back to the start of your journey as a leader, what do you wish you'd known then about the science of people?
I wished I'd known what was in my invisible trauma backpack because those unprocessed traumas that haven't been time stamped in my hippocampus show up in adult life. Not every day, but most days. And I think that real self-awareness, that piece around self-awareness, I think I wish I'd have known that. I wish I'd have known that the trauma, whether a big T and a small t, whatever the trauma looks like, and who are we to judge what trauma is? A pet dying. Who are we to judge whether that's a big trauma, a little trauma for someone? That kind of thing. But and how they show up, and how they show up in adult life, and how they can dysregulate you, and also understanding why that happens. And I think that's really important. But I think as well, that knowledge of the nervous system, as I said to you 2.5 years ago, I had no idea about any of this. I had absolutely no idea. So I would have loved to, I wish I'd have known about the windows of tolerance. I wish I'd have mapped that out. I wish I'd have mapped that out probably monthly, if not more frequently than that. I wish I'd have taught it to the members of staff in my teams. And I wish as well that I'd had those tools and techniques because actually it's okay to dysregulate and we all do, and that's okay. That's all right. But it's what we do. It's the choice that we make once we've realized that's happening. But also, when we're struggling with self-worth, when we're struggling with anxiety and stress, when we're struggling with imposter syndrome, we struggle with all of those things. And actually, what I wish that I'd have had at that moment is a backpack of tools and techniques I could have used in any one moment to help navigate those bumps in the road, whether it's leadership, whether it's school, whether it's personal. And that's the stuff that I really wish I'd had more agency and more knowledge and understanding. Because I think, yeah, maybe life might have looked a little bit, and leadership would probably have looked a lot different to how it did.
About you, Jacqui?
Well, I think it's about around stamina was my biggest liability. I have got amazing stamina for things. I think that comes from a sporting background. I'm an endurance sports. I did a lot of long distance running and then did a lot of, I was a hockey player, but I was at the back. So I was up and down that wings. So I think I've got a lot of stamina, but I saw that as being a real strength. So my stamina would be how much I turned up for, how much I was present, how much I was visibly seen present as well. So first in, last out. I think every Saturday in June would be First Holy Communions, and then very regularly it would be a Sunday as well. And so I would be ending up working 24/7 most days a week because you just didn't switch off. And I saw that as being a win. And actually, what it did was model depletion to my team. So I think I was modeling something when I first started in headship. I got better as it went on. That wasn't the best thing to model. And I don't think that served my team well because I expected that from everybody else as well. And that's the downside, isn't it? When you expect people to work at the same rate that you work, and actually they've got better boundaries in place. What about you, Jane?
I think the same as you, but I think I would probably flip it in the sense that I wish I'd known self-care wasn't a reward for surviving a heavy week, that actually self-care needed to be built into my normal week, because having that discipline and keeping those boundaries, because by having that self-care was filling my own cup, which meant that, when those difficult decisions came in, I could actually make them from a reflective, balanced, grounded state. And I always used to say, to people that I used to line manage, don't do as I do as I say, make sure you get that right balance between work and life. And I didn't. And the consequences were I became extremely ill, and it's taken a long time to get back up to where I am. And that was physical and mental illness, mental health, that was. So for me, yeah, planning your self-care as you would planning your governors meetings and your other, work, like you plan it in and you stick it in your diary and you don't deviate. Put those boundaries in place.
I think it's knowing what keeps you in that safe window. What is it you can do, either daily, weekly, that's going to keep you calm and grounded? If you take those things out, that becomes then an issue. And one of the things that I'm seeing more and more of now, which I absolutely love, and you guys may well have seen this as well, is more and more head teachers are having wellbeing days. Whether that's a day a week or a day every 2 weeks, they're having a day where they're working from home. And within that, obviously, there's some flexibility in terms of what they do, but also they offer it to their staff as well. Whoever that might be. But I'm seeing more and more of that coming in now, which I think is wonderful.
You need that. If we want people, not necessarily that way, but we need to ensure that our leaders and our future leaders have that ability to create that time and give themselves that permission. It's giving themselves that permission to do that. Because if we don't, we are not going to have the leaders of the future, because it is not sustainable by not doing that. Right, top tip, Gemma. Can you give us one practical scientific lever a leader can pull this week?
Breathe.
I love it. Yeah.
The one thing that connects our unconscious to our conscious mind is the breath. And it's something that I only come across in the last 6 months, but wow, it has a huge impact on me. And so I would say come back to your breath. And one thing that I do very often at the beginning of sessions, actually, because people come in, we've had a stressful day, stressful week. And actually at that moment, they are breathing quickly, they're breathing shallowly, usually kind of that compounding stresses cut off that blood flow to their prefrontal cortex. And so we need to take a moment just to land, just to ground, to regulate, to come back to our safety. So the breath is so key in that. And even yesterday I used this. So a tip for me would be we want to breathe in through our nose, 5. We hold it for 2 at the top, and then we breathe out for 8. So it's in for 5, hold for 2, out for 8. And we just do a slide, maybe just 5 or 6 of those. And just the invite there is to come and imagine that your stomach is a balloon. And we want to slightly inflate that balloon and slightly deflate that balloon. And we want to make that breathing slower and deeper. And trying to, avoid the breathing from the throat and the chest. coming back to your breath, and that can regulate you, ground you in as little as, 2 minutes. In fact, if you do it really well, it's 90 seconds,
It is.
so the
It
science
does.
says. So yeah, that's I come back to your breath because that's the bit that's gonna ground you and regulate you.
So, following on from that, Gemma, I think mine is very, very simple. And it was always about where I would slot meetings in. So I would work right up to the end of whatever I had to do, and then I would rush off to a meeting. So, for example, I would do things like I could just fit in this conversation with this parent, which would raise my anxiety levels to no end. And then I'd put the phone down and then I'd rush to do my staff meeting. And I think my tip is your breathing technique. And before I would go in, would now have that breath break. So I would take 3 deep breaths so that I wouldn't go straight into meeting. So my top tip is breathe before you go into a meeting. Take that time before you go into the next thing, rather than as a leader trying to chop and change and fit everything in one after the other, which we often do because we're time poor. So what about you, Jane?
I think for me, it's taking and picking up that Brené Brown marble in the jar. And I think, find, because we've got it in all the schools, there's one person that you always go and check up on this week, rather than going and checking up on them, check in with them instead. Focus on the human person rather than the person, rather than the teacher or the leader that perhaps is not doing something the way that you perceive they should be doing. So check in, fill up that respect and that trust marble jar, I think will be the best thing. And it's about culture change, isn't it? Okay, so we're going to do a quick circuit breaker before you go out into the real world. And it is the 3-2-1 activity. So just mentally name 3 things that you can see right now.
And now 2 things you can feel: the weight of your feet on the floor or the texture of a steering wheel. And finally, 1 thing that you can hear, just the distant hum of the school or the wind outside.
And that's it for this week. Gemma, thank you so much. It has been a really fascinating conversation, really inspiring. Your enthusiasm and positivity has just shone through, and your clarity around, those leadership opportunities you're providing, which aren't really out there. I never went to a CPD to have a challenging conversation. And as leaders, you're always having challenging conversations. And one thing that would have made life a lot easier. So for anyone who wants to take this further, Gemma is running a 3-day leadership program in Solihull, starting on Monday, June the 29th. And it's at Tudor Grange Academy. It is specifically for leaders who want to move from the grit to that sustainability. And we'll put the link and her email in the show notes.
But if you're listening to this and you're nodding, please send it on to one other leader. We need to stop the superhero narrative together. Leadership is hard, but you don't have to do it alone. We see you, we hear you, and we'll see you next time.